to start with a disclaimer, which is that I'm not anti-vegan. I actually think there's a lot of merit in the veganism position, and I would never discourage anyone from veganism or veganism activism. And I think there are good arguments for veganism, but I think those arguments are primarily the nutritional arguments, the environmental arguments, and perhaps even, you can appeal to some kind of maybe spiritual or religious arguments, i.e. that the vegan diet is good for one's mental well-being or their soul, so to speak. And obviously religions have made those arguments in the past. And also I think you can make an argument against someone else's reasoning. So like the name the trait argument for veganism, for example, it shows a philosophical inconsistency or a logical inconsistency in the anti-vegans position, the non-vegans position. I also think you can make good appeals to emotions. So you can maybe, just describe the horrors of factory farming, and that can convince somebody to modify their behavior and become a vegan. And you're actually causing a change in someone's behavior without actually making a formal argument in that sense. But the problem with the moral argument is, firstly, you have to presuppose moral realism, and that in itself is a real challenge to do, as we know. It's very difficult to prove moral realism. So you need a solid meta-ethical foundation to start with. And then the second thing is you need a good normative ethical theory. So you need an ethical principle which actually concludes that veganism is the morally superior position. So I suppose what I'm going to try and do today, though, however, is I'm willing to accept your meta-ethical foundation and your normative theory for veganism, provided it's a standard one. And when I say standard, normally the theory is something to do with, it's based in utilitarianism or some form of utilitarianism. And instead, what I will do is I'll try and demonstrate that I think your position, your theory leads to some absurd conclusions that you yourself would find unpalatable or uncomfortable. And it can lead to some behaviors that you yourself wouldn't probably personally adopt or publicly endorse. But before I obviously go into the specific reductios, perhaps it's best if I just ask you to clarify your metaethical position or the normative theory that you use to support veganism, number one. And number two, perhaps you could just give me the conclusions of that normative theory, i.e. what behaviors do you think it requires you to adopt as a vegan? So obviously I'll take it for granted that one of them is not killing and eating animals unnecessarily. But I'd like to know also what your position is on things like using animals for certain purposes, human purposes, like dogs, guide dogs for the blind or police dogs for police work. Also using replenishable products of animals, such as the wool of a sheep for clothing. And yeah, I think perhaps I'll leave it there, let you respond, and then maybe we can go into some of the more formal arguments.
Okay, well, first I just want to say that I don't think that you have to be like a moral realist or anything to think that one moral system can be superior to another if the two moral systems in question are they have like a similar base or something like that. And also I also said maybe about 20 minutes ago, I think, that I wasn't personally going to make any normative claims besides just saying that because I'm vegan, obviously eating animals is bad or whatnot. But so you're the one making the claim that veganism is hypocritical. So I'm not sure why you would want to know my particular opinion. Why would it matter? Because I know that there's a lot of different types of vegans, a lot of different types of ethical vegans. So why would all of them overall entail hypocrisy?
Yeah, so basically, well, obviously, if you're not an ethical vegan, then that's fine. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily hypocritical. The proposition is kind of geared towards the ethical vegan, so the vegan who claims that veganism is a morally superior position to non-veganism, right? So that person would have to claim, obviously that person is appealing to some form of moral realism. It could be some kind of error theory as well, but generally they are saying, if you're going to make a claim that veganism is morally superior, then you are appealing to some kind of moral fact or moral law in operation. So you would have to sort of justify that. But like I said, I'm not necessarily. I don't. I'm willing to accept whatever framework or theory you come up with, because I'm not going to debate you on that or challenge you on that, because then it will just descend into a debate on moral realism, which isn't really the sentiment of the proposition. I thought we'd just have a debate on the actual entailments of the normative theory. But first, I sort of need to know what theory you're sort of basing the ethical argument on.
That's weird, because I would think that you would have some idea of a vegan normative theory that you would want to bring up and say that is hypocritical. There's all kinds of theories that people can have.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah, okay, that is a fair point. So, I mean, I would just go, okay, if you're happy to just go along with the standard one, then the sentientism leading to utilitarianism, we can maybe work along those on that theory. Would that make sense to you?
Sure. I know a little bit about sentientism. I was rule utilitarianism just a few weeks ago, but yeah, so I could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you mentioned that, didn't you? Utilitarianism, yeah. So basically, and also the other thing I should have checked was whether you're. Yeah, I'm just presuming we're going with the standard definition of veganism, as put forward by the Vegan Society, which is. Yeah, well, are you willing to take that definition?
Yeah, whatever. I'm assuming you're talking about the definition that says to avoid animal exploitation as much as possible, or as much as practical.
Yeah, is it just it's exploitation and harm or animal suffering? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's the definition I was working on. So that's great. Okay. So basically, that definition, right, is based. It's essentially appealing to some moral principle, isn't it? So it's saying man should live this way, right? So there's a normative principle underpinning that proposition, that claim, right? So now the point is, right, is I think there's a lot of issue over that term. What is reasonable and what is practical? Okay, so I think that's pretty much arbitrary, right? It's subjective. So one man's reasonable is another man's unreasonable. Okay, so for instance, that's why I wanted to ask. That's why I sort of asked you at the start what your entailments, what you think the conclusions of veganism are. Like, for example, one shouldn't eat meat. I'll take that as a given. But what about other things like pet ownership, or using dogs for using animals for human services, or using the replenishable products of animals? I mean, would you say those are entailed by the vegan position as well, by the ethical position?
Yeah, those not breeding animals to be pets and to work for you would be entailed. Yes.
Right. Okay. So something like a guide dog for the blind would be a no-no as well, I guess. Right.
At one point, guide dogs and stuff is chill and whatnot, but now I think we can develop technology that's probably better than a guide dog for even cheaper than a guide dog.
Right. Okay. So you're appealing to the kind of practicality, the reasonableness. You're saying, so perhaps once upon a time it was reasonable, but now it's not.
Yeah, of course. So I would never argue that our ancestors should have just committed mass suicide. I don't know. I think there's overall utility in the long run of humanity.
Yeah. Okay, I've got you. Right. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So I suppose the first reductio that I would probably pull out is the which you may have come across, is the minimal calories reductio or argument, right, which says that based on that ethical principle which the vegan is using to promote ethical veganism, right, they themselves are now obliged to adopt a minimum calorie diet, right? And I mean, before I go into that, I mean, are you familiar with that argument, or do you want me to
I think I've heard arguments. Are you saying Is this some argument for not eating any more calories than you absolutely need, or something like that?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not sure that's even a reductio, but if somebody agreed to that, I'm not sure it would be a reductio. It sounds slightly reasonable, at least.
Right, but then minimum calories sounds reasonable, but minimal calories, you understand, means no sort of unnecessary foods, no tasty foods, no condiments, no salt, no pepper, no sugar, no.
If somebody wanted to, I don't see why that would be a. I'm not sure why that's a. I don't know. That's not really a reductio, if you ask me. That's.
Well, it's.
I don't know. I
Well,
don't think it's entailed by veganism. I don't think it's entailed by veganism. If you're asking me that.
But you just said a moment ago you think it is entailed, but you don't see it as a reductio.
Did I say no? I didn't say. I don't think I said that veganism entails that. I said that about something else.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I misheard then, or misunderstood.
But
I think. Go ahead.
Were you saying that because there's like crop deaths or something involved with plant food, so that's why we would
precisely.
have to
Yeah,
okay.
Precisely. Because
sure.
right, do you see so the ethical argument for veganism is right that a person should not engage in any behaviour which is going to cause unnecessary animal harm and deaths. Right now, eating more food than is required for your basic survival is always going to result in more animal deaths. Right, because food obviously has to be produced, it has to be manufactured, it has to be transported. Right, so it's always going to involve animal deaths. So ergo, the vegan should theoretically, if they want to support this ethical principle, right, live a minimum calorie lifestyle and diet. Now, when you said you don't see a problem with that, if a vegan wants to do that, I agree. If a vegan wants to do that, that's correct. But the point is, a vegan who doesn't do that is, by their own definition, immoral. By their own criteria, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I would be totally down with everybody trying to cut down on all the calories. I think that we do waste a lot of food. That's
right.
Hardly reductio from my perspective.
Okay, so no, yeah, it's not a reductio if you're endorsing that and adopting it yourself. So do you adopt a minimum calorie diet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see what the point of eating excess calories would be, besides just gluttony or something like that.
Right. So you think
but when you said
has
earlier, when you said unnecessary foods, though, I think you implied we can't eat like sweets or something like that. Surely we could still eat sweets as long as we don't eat too many calories, right? Like we can just replace some of our calories that day with like junk food.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's true. When I use sweets in that sense, I didn't mean sweets for like for nutritional requirements. I meant it for well, sweets is an interesting one, isn't it? Because actually, would you be getting nutritional requirements from that? So I think I don't know.
Oh,
yeah,
I don't care.
Huh?
Like if somebody wants to eat sweets, I don't think that's really a consideration, anyways.
Okay, well, the point is, like, we could create the perfect diet, right, for everybody, whereby it was just minimum, right? It was bare minimum, the bare minimum diet, which just met the person's nutritional and dietary requirements, nutritional and vitamin requirements, right? But there was no taste involved. It was nothing fancy. There were no spices, condiments, etc., right? So you're saying there's nothing wrong with that. That is a position which you think is entailed by veganism and one that you personally endorse and adopt.
No spices and everything. That sounds a little overkill, especially since most spices, I think you can pick a lot of spices without killing like rodents and whatnot. But like pepper comes off of a tree.
Well, a lot of spices get imported, right? There's a lot of transportation in the spice industry. Right?
Well, when it comes to like this whole so this is one of the hypocrisy arguments, I'm assuming, because you're saying that most vegans eat excess calories. And if I'm being honest with you, whenever I see any kind of way overly, not just obese person, but like a way overly obese person, the thought does go through my head that like, whoa, there's way too much food going through that guy. Like, this is kind of a waste. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not sure, like, I don't know where the line is or whatever. I'm not sure we would have to cut out all spices and everything. But there's definitely too much food being eaten, even by vegans, I'm sure.
Yeah, I see. So you're saying like gluttony in itself could be seen as immoral, yeah, regardless of veganism, regardless of the veganism issue. And I think that is a reasonable point you make. But the argument isn't based on obese people. I'm talking about minimum calories. So you need only a BMI of. Do you use the BMI metric there, body mass index metric?
I don't care. You can use body fat percent,
Yeah.
like BMI. I don't really care.
No. I was just asking whether you know it, because I don't know over there where you're from whether you know that. Because I was just going to use a figure. I was going to say, yeah, you know the
in
figure.
like
Okay.
elementary school, I think we use that in elementary school BMI. After that, we use like body fat percentage.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I was just going to say BMI. So a person with a BMI of less than, for example, nobody should have a BMI of over 18. We could say, right, and anyone with a BMI of over 18 would be.
Well, sure. If you're going, well, your argument is just excess calories is hypocritical. And to that, I don't. If you're going to ask me from a hedonistic utilitarian perspective, I would say that that's probably not the case from that perspective, because I'm sure like it depends on how many calories in excess we're talking about. If we're talking about like 1,000 calories excess, that might be able to be justified. Like maybe if you're lifting weights, or maybe just if you're getting a lot of pleasure from it or something. I don't know. I'm not a utilitarian anymore, but I think you mentioned earlier that you were that you wanted to talk somewhat about utilitarian veganism, right?
Yeah. I appreciate that you're not a vegan. Well, we have to adopt, don't we? I have to adopt an ethical principle here to make the argument, right? So I'm happy to work with yours if you want to provide an alternative to utilitarianism, right? But I can't go through every single ethical principle, isn't it? That's why I'm just sort of working with the popular one.
Well, no.
Which is utilitarianism.
Well, that's why I don't actually have a particular ethical framework at the moment. I'm still reading stuff about that, but. Is there I'll admit that this excess calorie thing is definitely an issue, and there definitely are things that could be found as hypocritical, like this excess calorie thing, I'm sure, but I'm not sure that this is a hypocritical thing about veganism particularly. This could be like really anybody who thinks environmentally wise at all would, I guess that might entail that. Don't you think just environmentalism alone can entail that?
Sorry, LogicBoi, you cut out quite a bit there. I don't know if it's my phone or my reception signal or yours, but I didn't hear a lot of that. I don't know if you could just make that point again.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I'm not sure that veganism particularly, or the belief of not wanting to kill animals unnecessarily, particularly entails this reducing calories any more than something like environmentalism or something like that.
I don't quite follow what you mean. Sorry, can you try explaining it a different way?
Well, if somebody was an environmentalist, doesn't that mean that they want to be more sustainable and whatnot?
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just from an environmental perspective, we would all want to do that and stuff. I don't think it's. I think maybe everybody should push to decrease the amount of calories, and maybe even just that. I don't know. Do you have any other cases again? Hypocrisy cases? I do think maybe in the area of calorie consumption, there could be a lot of hypocritical vegans if they're like over consuming or something like that. But I don't think it's a given that all vegans have to be that way.
Okay. But the point is, you mentioned the environmental argument, but the environmental argument is not a moral argument. So my proposition is only specific to the moral argument. You know, the claim that veganism is a moral obligation, or veganism is morally superior to and non-veganism. Right? That's the only claim of the vegans that I'm attacking. Does that make sense? So all the reductios are based on that proposition.
Okay. Well, for this point about the calories, I'm just going to say that is slightly hypocritical, I suppose, and we should work towards that. But now we don't. To be an ethical vegan, though, I'm sure you don't have to consume excess calories. So we can move on to the next point, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah. But I just want to wrap that one up first, because you mentioned something about the weightlifter, which was very interesting, right? Now, why does the weightlifter? So you say it's okay for the weightlifter to consume maybe twice as many calories as you do, for example, right? But why? How can you justify that on the moral principle? Because the moral principle is his behavior and actions of weightlifting are killing animals, right? And is that weightlifting essential?
Well, I preface that with saying that would be from like a hedonistic utilitarian perspective. Somebody lifting weights and stuff, and I said particularly 1,000 extra calories to lift some weights. The utility in that might outweigh the negative utility of, like, I don't know, some suffering rodents or something like that.
Right. So now we're into kind of this utility monster picture, aren't we? Where you're saying one weightlifter can justify killing thousands of animals, perhaps, right? For his
Thousands.
excess calorie consumption.
Well, sure, yeah, I guess, but yeah, I don't see why that's a big deal. I think personally,
Right.
I think
Okay.
humans. I think that we are justified in killing animals for human utility.
Right.
Just
Okay.
not in
That's
excess.
a good point. That's a good point. So the meat eater or the non-vegan is going to say, I get great utility and great pleasure from eating meat, from eating a beef burger. And how are you going to respond to him
Well, right,
or her?
but then I would just say that the scale is a bit different now, because we're thinking of a cow, right, which is quite a bit higher sentience than something like a praying mantis and a rabbit and like some mice in a field or something, and also the utility of just tasting it. I'm not sure you can count that as outweighing the cow's life and its future and stuff like that. But in the case of the crop deaths and the field and whatnot, um, I don't know. I already said I think we should probably decrease calories, but from a utilitarianism perspective, which I'm not a real utilitarian anymore, but from that perspective, they might say that the utility of like lifting weights might outweigh the small utility of like some rodents or something like that.
Right. So do you see this is what I think is called special pleading. You're making an exception for the weightlifter. So you're saying the endorphins that the weightlifter gets from his exercise, right? That he can justify killing animals for that purpose. But the meat eater, right, who, let's say he just eats chicken, right? We don't have to use a cow. We can just say he eats chicken sandwiches now and then. You're saying he can't justify his taste pleasure, which gives him great utility. So that's where I would say there's a hypocrisy there. And I don't know.
Well,
if
there's a clear difference there. Like when we're talking about eating meat, there's obviously a lot more. There's even more crop deaths involved in eating meat, and there's just obviously more death involved in eating meat. So there's obviously way more negative utility there that needs to be justified, rather than the case of the vegan bodybuilder.
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, if you're talking about, for example, a meat eater eating 1,500 calories a day, right, and perhaps he has one chicken sandwich, a couple of chicken sandwiches every week, versus the weightlifter who eats twice as much, 3,000 vegan calories a day, right, and maybe imports food from, with special products which are imported. You could argue, I think there's an empirical case to say, and I think it's a common sense one actually, to say that actually his activities result in many more animal deaths and suffering than the meat eaters does.
Wait, what kind of meat is this meat eater eating exactly?
I said a couple of chicken sandwiches a week.
Oh, a couple of chicken sandwiches a week. Why would the vegan wait? Is this meat eater a bodybuilder as well?
No, it's not. Yeah.
Oh no.
Okay.
Yeah. So why would the bodybuilder be responsible for more deaths? How would you know that? Isn't there crop deaths involved in like raising chickens? Are these backyard chickens or something? Just eating grass?
Yeah, but I said the weightlifter's consuming twice as many calories, 3,000 calories a day versus.
Well, sure, but why does that mean that more animals are dying?
Because more calories means more food, right? And in any food production and manufacturing and transporting, animals are going to die, right? It's inevitable. I'm not just talking. We're also talking insects here, right? Because animals includes insects, right? I don't know whether
how much calories do you think it takes to make the chicken that the person eats?
Sorry, how many calories?
How many calories do you think it takes to make a chicken, right? You have to feed the chicken quite a few calories before you can kill it and eat it, right? that has to
Yeah,
factor in as
course,
well.
yeah.
And a
Yeah,
lot of
but we're
chickens are
talking.
fed soy. Most chickens actually are fed soy. If I'm pretty sure about that. And soy is monocropped, which is where they
Yeah,
I think it's called monocropping. So I'm not
right.
sure if this dude is just getting a regular chicken sandwich from the store that's like not free range and stuff, or like something like that. Uh, I'm not sure you can just easily say that the vegan bodybuilder is causing more death, because there's quite a few soybeans going to these chickens, and also I don't know. I just find it weird.
Yeah, it is a strange. It
Of
is a
course,
really
there would
strange
be more
argument.
deaths. Of course, there would be more deaths. Like we don't even have to consider it a bodybuilder. We can just say this person is considerably bigger, so they have to eat twice as many calories. Does the fact that they're not a bodybuilder and they're just naturally bigger change it?
Well, that does change it, because that's the point. It's necessary and essential, right? So that's sort of inbuilt into the veganism definition, right? So you do what is a bare minimum. This is the sort of minimalist argument against veganism, right? That you do what is required for your essential survival and well-being, right? But you don't go over and above, right? None of your actions or behaviors should result in excess animal deaths. So the weightlifter has no need to weightlift, right? There's no essential requirement in life that says you must weightlift and put on lots of muscle, right? But there is a requirement for the big person, the big made person, to maybe consume more calories than a person half their size. Yes.
Um, okay. And with the bodybuilding point, are you when we're thinking of a bodybuilder, is this like somebody who's like way bigger than they need to be, or they're pretty much just working out for like for overall health? Like, because we could even look
Yeah,
at
maybe like.
going to the gym and lifting weights as a necessity in some way.
Yeah, okay, let's say
Are we
they
thinking of
are.
like a monster bodybuilder that's like trying to get as big as possible for no reason?
No, let's just go with a sort of average. I mean, it's not necessary to weightlifting. You could use any sports, right? Any leisure activity, right? They're unnecessary, aren't they? What is there any necessity for you to play
I would
basketball or
say that
play
it's easy.
soccer?
I would say that it is a necessity to work out. How could you say it's not a necessity to do sport activities and athletic activities?
Because people live without doing them.
Not as long.
Well, there are plenty of people who live like monks in monasteries that don't engage in them.
Monks do things that keep them from getting like bad posture and things like that, and keep them from they live much healthier lives than your average person that doesn't play
Yeah,
sports.
precisely. So there's no necessity for the sports person to play sports, right? And sports uses calories. Sports obviously kills animals unnecessarily, because you have to obviously, get to the venue where you're playing the sport. For starters, that requires transportation. So the point I'm trying to make is, and I think these are absurd points I'm making as well. I agree with you. They're absurd, aren't they? But that's my point. These are the absurd conclusions that the ethical arguments for veganism lead to, which is why I think the ethical argument should be dropped, the moral argument should be dropped, and a vegan should just focus on the other arguments, which are much
Well, I don't think
stronger.
it's absurd. I
But
don't think it's
you're
absurd to say
basically
that we
getting
should.
the.
I don't think it's absurd to even say that we should stop. Like, if you're going to say that that it's not a necessity to play sports and that we can live just as long without playing sports, then maybe maybe we should consider not playing sports. I don't think. I don't think so. So all you're saying now is that right now, vegans who are living, or most of them are living hypocritically. But I don't see why we would have to be hypocritical, or why ethical veganism would entail hypocrisy. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you're just saying that we haven't fine-tuned our lives enough. Like we've only just started, Jiva. Give us some time to limit our calorie and stuff.
Yeah, firstly, for the record, I'm not saying you're immoral, or I'm not saying vegans are immoral. Okay, so I know lots of vegans who aren't, right? Or not immoral, sorry, hypocritical. I'm just saying the argument is hypocritical, right? If like, for an ethical vegan, now not all vegans are ethical
I don't think
vegans,
it
right? They
has
won't.
to be, though. That's the thing. I don't think it's necessarily entails
Yeah,
hypocrisy. That's why I'm saying.
yeah, okay, fine. But the point you made about like the sports example, right? But yeah, but I mean, that does feel like a reductio to me. It feels a bit of an absurd conclusion to say to somebody, right, it's immoral to play sports, right? And we should find a better way of you sort of conserving calories and conserving energy and preserving animal life. Doesn't that feel just intuitively like a ridiculous conclusion to you?
Well, I don't know what to say about it at the moment because I'm really not well read enough on ethics. So I'm somewhat read on it, but
yeah,
I'm not going to say, because I would say right now that I could see. I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal. If everybody agreed that if everybody agreed that we didn't need sports to live longer or to or have as much fun or whatever, I guess that's a new consideration, having as much fun.
right.
That we should probably consider not doing it if it's causing excess suffering or something like that. I can see why you would see that as a reductio, but I would just see that as us not practicing our values well enough, which would be hypocritical. But that doesn't mean that ethical veganism has to be hypocritical. It just means that right now, like, we're all like, the vegans aren't perfect or anything.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's a good point. You're right. It doesn't entail necessary hypocrisy, right? What I'm saying is it entails behaviors and actions which the vegan themselves wouldn't adopt or endorse. Right. So the average vegan isn't going to say, "Oh, right, yes, you have to go and live like a monk or a hermit in a cave somewhere." Right. They're not going to say that is an entailment of veganism. Right. But theoretically, it is an entailment of veganism almost, right? Because of the ethical.
Well, no, not that.
Veganism. Well, ironically, it is, because the thing is, right, it says man should live, right, by reducing the unnecessary harm and suffering to animals wherever possible, right? Now, you could argue that anything, like lots of your activities, I could just take an average person like yourself, I'm presuming, and look and go through your whole, day-to-day activities, and I could make lots of savings there, which would revisions which would save the lives of hundreds of animals, thousands of animals every year, right? We're talking insects as well here, insects, small rodents, things like that. So for instance, transportation would be a problem, driving a car would be a problem, any leisure activities, not just sports, but going for any leisure activities, unnecessary shopping or going to the cinema with your friends, right? Holidays, all of these things are killing animals, right? And they're not essential for your survival. They're leisure activities, pleasure activities, which give you increased, as you put it, utility. But then on the same token, you're criticizing the non-vegan for justifying their meat consumption with "it gives me pleasure and increased utility." So that's the hypocrisy.
Yeah. So leisure activities are another thing, like going out, like wasting resources on unnecessary things. But that doesn't. If somebody didn't want to do that, if somebody decided, I'm not going to waste any resources from now on, I'm not going to cause any unnecessary suffering, that doesn't mean that they have to live a life that resembles like that of a monk. Because I'm sure we would still consider things like, I don't know, like space travel necessary, like healthcare necessary. Lots of things that don't resemble a monk lifestyle would have to still take place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was only using the monk as a sort of tongue-in-cheek comment, but what I mean is you would have to live a very sort of reclusive life. So in your house, you would be sort of very restricted in how you move, where you go, what you do. It would only be essential journeys. So like you said, no socializing, no leisure activities, no driving. Probably have to cycle.
I don't see why we couldn't have. Wait. I don't see why we couldn't have leisure activities that didn't cause harm.
Like what?
like maybe some sort of love. Wait, are you telling me that leisure activities even in your home cause harm? What if you're just doing it in your house?
Well, do you know, ironically, even this conversation we're having right now is killing animals, right? So we would probably be better off just sitting at home, just in silence, right? Because obviously this is using the internet. The internet comes from energy. Energy is a product of power stations or windmill farms, right? And how many animals die in the production of those and the erection of those? So it's an irony. I agree.
Wait. What's unnecessary about this conversation?
Yeah. Well, that's the point, isn't it? So we think it's necessary. That's why I started by saying one man's reasonable is another man's unreasonable, right? Because it's very arbitrary. So the non-vegan can clearly say to you, look, it's necessary for me to have a turkey for dinner. It's been a custom and a part of our tradition, family tradition for centuries. We really enjoy it. We look forward to it. It gives us all great utility. It brings the family together. And I don't see how you can say, no, it's not okay for you to do that, but it's okay for me to use the internet every day, just to play computer games or to have, conversations with people. And even though that results in animal deaths as well, right?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how us using. Did you explain how us using the internet is killing animals right now?
Yeah. So internet comes from it's energy, right? Internet is electricity. Sorry. Yeah. You're using electricity to
Of course,
use
of
the
course.
internet, right? And electricity comes from obviously power sources like a power station or a windmill farm, right? Now those have to be erected, don't they? So in erecting those, you have to clear land, you have to use heavy machinery, and you have to do a big developmental project. Now that obviously kills hundreds and thousands of animals, doesn't it? Right? So any
Sure.
energy use you use right now is obviously contributing to that. It's like the whole consumer argument against, dairy products, for instance, like you're part of the process, part of the chain, where you suddenly take on some of the ethical responsibility for the way in which that product was manufactured. So similarly here, you're taking on some of the moral culpability, aren't you, for that energy production and the lives that were lost in that energy production.
Well, now, because you just said a second ago that what is necessary is subjective, and I agree with that to an extent. But then from that, now we have somewhat of a problem where now I'm not sure you can say that it's hypocritical if our ideas of necessity is different. I'm not sure you can say it's hypocritical anymore because we're just talking about different things.
But that's where I do actually bring the hypocrisy in, because I say the moral argument then fails. It sort of self-defeats, because morality is supposed to be kind of like objective, isn't it? So it's supposed to be absolute. So you can say that this action is right, this action is wrong. As soon as you bring this sort of arbitrariness into it, subjectivity, it suddenly then loses that normative force, right? It's no longer, it's just, it almost self-defeats, because it's got no grounding, essentially. You're just saying, all right, do what you find is reasonable, right? And then the meat eater will say, I find eating meat reasonable. And you'll say, well, I don't find it reasonable. And then you'll say, I find, bodybuilding reasonable. And then the vegan who is, the extreme vegan who's above you, like the so-called hippie vegan, will say, no, I find weightlifting unreasonable. So do you see, it's just all, there's no principle which you can all sort of appeal to and agree on to determine which actions are moral and which actions are immoral.
I agree with that. I agree.
So
there's no clear objective morality, but that doesn't just because that doesn't mean that anybody's hypocritical for suggesting their own. But when it comes to what you just said about morality not being objective or something like that, or having some sort of contradictions and things, I'm not sure why I'm not sure why that would be a reason to not consider ethics anymore if we're still going to do other things that you can actually apply the same argument to, like science.
So in what way?
Well, you said that it's hypocritical. You said it's hypocritical to not have an objective form of ethics.
Well, no. I said ethics would break down if you don't have an objective principle which you all agree on, right? Then it's
okay.
Like, for instance, if you, for example, if you're making a moral argument which says, and your moral argument is based on do what you find is pleasurable, do what you find is reasonable, then I would say that's not really a moral argument.
Do you think we have an objective form of science?
Well, not necessarily, but there's a difference between morality. That's the point. There's a difference between morality and science, isn't it? Because morality is normative, right? Science is empirical.
Sure, but I'm not sure why the argument wouldn't apply anymore. Just because of that, you said that something not being objective makes it fall apart, but science isn't objective, and neither is empiricism.
Sorry, I don't mean no. Yeah, what I don't mean something that is not objective would fall apart. What I mean is there can't be an arbitrariness right, to morality. Then if there is, then it would fall apart. Similarly, there can't be an arbitrariness or subjectivity in science, can there? You can't. You agree on the sort of principles. You agree on observation, don't you? And the scientific method, right? So that's an objective principle which you're all agreeing upon, right? But if you can't agree
So you're
upon,
saying if we all agreed on ethics, if we all agreed on it, now it would be objective. So now you're just talking about like society. It's like societal objectivity.
no, I'm talking about like as an individual, right? You've got to provide a some kind of objective principle on which to ground your ethical theory, on which to build your ethical theory, right? So, for example, the utilitarian will say the principle is increasing, maximizing utility, or the deontologist will say the principle is subscribing to this list of do's and don'ts, right? But if your principle as a vegan, as an ethical vegan, is do what you think is reasonable, then it kind of self-defeats, doesn't it, as a moral theory? It just breaks down, because then everybody's just going to do different things, right? It's got no normative force to follow.
Well, that's an argument against non-objective moral theories, I suppose, but I don't see why that would make somebody a hypocrite.
Well, it would mean that it's not an ethical theory anymore. That's what it would mean. So it would self-defeat as an ethical theory, and then you can't call yourself an ethical.
Well, that's just not true. Are you saying that subjective moral theories are, or ones that are self-described as subjective, are just not ethical theories? That doesn't make any sense.
Sorry, I didn't follow that question.
Are you saying that a moral theory has to be thought of as objective to be a moral theory?
No, not thought of as objective, but it has to have an ethical principle underlying it, doesn't it? Right, that's what a normative ethical theory is, right? There's an ethical principle underlying it. It gives you the principle for determining which actions are right and wrong, which intentions or decisions are right and wrong. If you don't have a principle, then I don't think you've got a theory, have you? You haven't got an ethical theory. You've just got some kind of
why does this principle have to be why does this principle have, like, what moral theory is there that has some objective principle, and why is veganism special in this sense, and why is it hypocritical? Still, I'm going to ask again, why is it hypocritical?
Yeah, I just said that the principle underlying utilitarianism is maximizing utility. The principle underlying deontology is this list of do's and don'ts. The principle underlying virtue ethics is, this set of character traits or virtues that one should possess, right? So, but if you're saying that veganism is just about doing what you think is reasonable, then it just becomes a personal preference. It's not an ethical theory, is it? So then, so you're right. It's not hypocritical. It would just self-defeat, and then you haven't got a moral argument, have you? So
no, we're going back. Okay, so when you're talking about the reasonability, we're talking about what people think is necessary now again, and the difference between people, because I'm assuming this is coming from the subjectivity of what is reasonably necessary. Right.
Yes, exactly. Precisely. So perhaps I could give you an example to maybe make the point a bit clearer. So we touched on like the monks, right? Like monk lifestyle before, right? And in parts of India, the Indian subcontinent, historically, there were groups and cultures, right, that used to endorse, I don't know what they call it, but sweeping the floor in front of you as you walk, because it's sort of they thought it was it would save insects, right? They didn't like the idea of stamping and crushing on insects. Okay.
Yeah, I think Jainists still do that.
Jainists still do that. I think there are parts of in the Indian subcontinent, you're right, and cultures and groups and perhaps monks that do that, right? Now, so for them, that's a reasonable expectation, right? They think this is reasonable for us to sweep the floor in front of us when we walk. Now, do you think it's reasonable for you to sweep the floor, or you or me to sweep the floor in front of us as I walk? It's not a real difficult thing to do. You just buy a broom, right? It doesn't cost very much money. It doesn't take much time or effort, does it? You can do that. You can save thousands of insects a year probably by doing that. Do you think it's reasonable to expect something?
Well, whether something is reasonable, I guess, depends on your reason. Like if I would say that for me right now, brushing the floor in front of me with a broom would not be reasonable, because it would not be reasonable. I just cut out for a second, but it would not be reasonable because
it looks silly, right? That's the only reason you can give.
No, not because it looks silly. I don't care how it looks. It's because I don't think that me stepping on a bug, taking a step, has enough negative impact to let's say I was sweeping the floor in front of me. This might cause me enough displeasure to actually outweigh the like negative impact on a few bugs if I step on them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but then the problem with that argument, LogicBoi, is that the non-vegan can say the same thing. They can say, look, for me to give up meat would cause me too much displeasure, right? So it's probably on balance, it's more reasonable for me to continue with my meat diet. Right, so that's where we've got this problem now. It's just all subjective. So the monk is looking at you, right, and saying the Jain monk is looking at you and saying, LogicBoi, you are unreasonable, right? You are unnecessarily killing thousands of animals a year unnecessarily. And then you're looking at the non-vegan and saying, Mr. Non-vegan, you're unreasonable. You're unnecessarily killing thousands of animals per year. And I'm sure, do you see the hypocrisy here? Do you see the problem?
No, because I think there is an intuitional difference between what is reasonably necessary, yes, and somebody might try and make a case that eating a turkey or something is necessary, and that the pleasure they gain or the displeasure that they'll get from not eating the turkey outweighs the turkey's suffering or whatever. But I would say that's a lot less intuitive, and also it's we can pretty much prove that that a few insects being stepped on isn't going to have even the same if I added up like 10 bugs being stepped on, that's not even going to equal probably the capacity of like me feeling a pinch.
Hold on, we don't know that, do we? Because it depends on what your sort of
I'm sure it's likely though.
Okay, well, it depends on the sentience hierarchy. I don't know if you subscribe to some kind of sentience hierarchy where you would say the insects feel less, where you wouldn't value the life of an insect as much as, for example, a mammal.
I think sentience hierarchies are reasonable. Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, but bear in mind, okay, so that's walking. Okay, I agree with you. That does seem a little extreme from the Jain monk, and perhaps we can't reasonably expect people to do that, even though it's a very simple thing to make. Perhaps, I mean, think about it. I could even design, right, a sort of an automatic broom which you could just like attach to your waist, right? So it just sweeps the floor in front of you automatically as you walk, so you wouldn't even have to make any effort. Would you say that would be a good invention for society?
Like a little leaf blower that can go on your crotch. Yeah, that would be pretty dope.
Yeah. Yes, but do you think we should invent that?
No, well, now the argument can be made that making these contraptions could also just kill bugs, so it just wouldn't matter. Like we wouldn't have to do that.
That's a good point, actually. Have to do an empirical calculus, I suppose, to work out whether it would save more lives than it would cost. But let's say, okay, so that's walking, and I agree with you. How many insects do we actually kill when we walk? Probably not that many, right? But let's look at transportation now, right? You kill, I don't know I can't remember. I did hear a statistic recently that you kill, it's thousands, isn't it? The average driver will kill thousands of insects every year when driving, and also some larger animals like small mammals like rodents, hares, rabbits, etc. So are you going to endorse not driving anywhere unnecessarily?
You know, I do give a little moment of silence in my head every time I see a bug hit the windshield, if I'm being honest. But
it's not
when we're talking about driving, like I still think that just like in the case of walking, it's pretty much the same. Like not only, well, it's also a bit different because these bugs, like they don't, I feel like the bugs shouldn't even be going into the airway of the traffic anyways. I think that they should have enough cognitive abilities to figure that one out. And if they don't, I think it's just clear evidence that us driving down the street has more utility than like the bugs the bugs on it. I'm pretty sure. Like we can't just
come on, you can't blame them if you're going at 70 miles per hour on the highway, isn't it? And you, isn't it? They're just flying around, isn't it? And you whack them. You can't blame them.
Well, no, I think it's just sure. I mean, I know that it actually they get sucked in because of the cars are going in like a straight line, and it causes some sort of like some sort of thing. But yeah, but I mean, I'm sure. I don't think people should drive unnecessarily, anyways. Like I don't even think that I'm going to ever buy myself a car or anything like that.
Right.
Because I think it's a huge waste for everybody to have an individual car. It just adds so much to landfills, and I think cars are like one of the most wasteful things that we use right now. But
right.
So yeah,
but it wouldn't just be cars. Yeah, it wouldn't just be cars, would it? It would be any sort of motor transportation, like a bus, a train, a ship, a plane. All of that would have to be sort of discouraged by the ethical vegan, right? Unnecessary trips. Now, there might be some essential trips, like if you're going to the hospital for, an emergency, fair enough. But if you're going to the cinema or driving to the shopping centre or driving to meet some friends or going to a cafe, all of that stuff, unfortunately, is unnecessary, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I would say that if you were in the position of wanting to build a cinema as well, you would have to consider all the resources that go into something like that. And I'm not sure if you could, using like hedonistic calculus, justify a cinema. But I don't. That's why I'm not really a utilitarian anymore, and I don't know. I'm not well read enough to counter these things. I know that there are people out. I've heard these exact points countered before. I'm not sure if they were ways that I would agree with, but I know that they can be countered. But
yeah, it's a fair point you make. Sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say that's why I put the proposition in, because I haven't heard reasonable counters to these. I would appreciate if somebody could provide them, but I haven't heard any reasonable counters to these. I think they just sweep them under the floor, the vegans, and they don't like addressing them. But it's very difficult. That's my point. I think because the ethical argument for veganism really contains that component that you should avoid unnecessary harm and suffering to animals, and it's very difficult to to rebut these points that I'm making, I think.
Well, I would say that veganism is still a pretty new movement, and pretty much all vegans, we're still going to be heavily impacted by society in our wants and our habits and things like this. And so we're not going to, as soon as we start trying to be an ethical vegan and whatnot, we're not going to instantly start doing all these calculations like when we're going to the cinema and whatnot and things like this. But after a few generations, I'm sure these arguments would gain a bit more merit. And I don't think it's as bad a reductio as some might think to say that a cinema is not necessary, therefore maybe we shouldn't have it. I think that that's perfectly reasonable, especially considering, I mean, if you just one glimpse at all the landfills is enough to justify that thought for me.
Yeah, but it's not just cinemas. Maybe cinemas was a bad example because you seem to be quite a disciplined.
I think it's a good example. Well, I think it's a good example because it seems like a trivial thing, just going to the movies, but it's
Yeah, so I meant that example for me to use because you've probably accepted that. You've probably accepted that entailment, shall we say, and said that's not unreasonable. You're saying, yeah, we shouldn't be going to the cinema. But the point is, I was just using that because I thought you might go to the cinema, or that you might be supportive of people going to the cinema. But I could use just any leisure activity. That's my point, isn't it? Even going to the gym. I mean, you could just work out at home. Even going to like I said, going to play a sports game, or going to any sort of concert or any sort of audience-based event, socializing essentially, right? We'd all have to just stay indoors all the time, right? And only leave the house for essential purposes like work or hospital appointments, right? And that to me is a reductive.
Well,
I don't see how you.
I'm sure we can make a case that social contexts where we're interacting with each other. I'm sure you can make the case that those are necessary. Surely you must think that some social interaction is necessary in person, right? Like at least some.
Well, I do, but I think the ethical vegan can't. That's the point, isn't it? I think you could socialize over Zoom, right? You don't need face-to-face contact, do you?
Well, I'm sure there are some people that could argue that are like, I don't know, biologists or neuroscientists or something that would argue, or even psychologists that would argue that somebody might like go crazy or something from just. I know there's a lot of people these days that just sit on their computer all day and like don't like interact with people in person. There's tons of people like that. There's a good chance that one of us is that, but I'm just kidding. But I mean, we are on Discord, by the way. But I think you would have to make the case that it's not necessary first. I think that I would have to be agnostic on that one. I don't think it's just a given that it's not necessary for social interaction. But yeah, I would say that any case that you make where it seems as though we're doing unnecessary suffering, I would say that, yeah, we should probably cut that out in the long run. So I'm not sure why that entails a hypocrisy.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's what I mean. It doesn't entail a hypocrisy if you're willing to accept these conclusions and modify your life and your behaviors. So then I'm wrong, right? I would happily concede the proposition if you say, I am, going to minimize my calories. I'm never going to go out and socialize again. I'm never going to drive anywhere unnecessarily. I'm never going to go on holiday, use transport unless it's for an emergency or some kind of obligation. If you accept all of these, and I think you win. You've shown that I'm wrong.
I'll accept that doing those things are hypocritical, but I won't accept that a vegan has to do those things.
But hold on. But then that's my argument, isn't it? I'm saying that is entailed. That is what a vegan has to do if they want to maintain the ethical argument. Otherwise, they are hypocritical.
Well, I know. I just said that. I said that if somebody does do these things, they're hypocritical. But that doesn't mean that veganism itself is hypocritical if the vegan isn't exercising it well enough.
Oh well, the moral argument is hypocritical, isn't it? So now there might be the perfect vegan out there. You're right. Okay. But when I say the moral argument, I'm just saying what most people would use as the moral argument and what most people would say is entailed by that moral argument. Like
we use that today, right? And I agree that we should cut out these particular things that you said, and in the long run. And I might not do that immediately myself, but just because I would practice these hypocrisies, that doesn't mean that ethical veganism entails this hypocrisy. And also, you don't know, that's what you don't know how progressive a vegan can be. Like, there's all sorts of different vegans that like some vegans don't eat like artificial colors and stuff like that because it's like tested on animals, which I'm not. I don't eat artificial colors that much anyways, just because I don't even know what food that's in, but things like that. But I don't. I do think that you're right in the sense that there's still lots of that veganism isn't the end all to ending animal suffering, or at least the perceived image of veganism where we just change our diet. That's not the end all of animal suffering or of preventing unnecessary suffering. We're gonna have to take it a lot farther, obviously, if we're gonna want to be like real progressive about this.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But actually, no, you did raise a good point there. You said that you would probably accept that it is a requirement of the vegan argument, but perhaps there is an element of hypocrisy in many vegans' behaviours and actions, but that doesn't make the actual argument, the moral argument, hypocritical. That's the kind of point you're making? So you were saying that even you yourself might engage in some of these behaviours which you shouldn't be, according to the moral argument of veganism, but that's just something that you have to like personally work on. Is that have I got that right? The sort of point you were just
exactly
making.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just because somebody doesn't carry out the moral philosophy correctly, or if they're doing it in a hypocritical manner, that doesn't invalidate the philosophy itself. It just invalidates the person really in being able to like espouse the philosophy.
Yeah. No, that's a valid point. But my sort of response to that would be that I think the actual philosophy itself it's very difficult because an argument has to come from a person, doesn't it? Right. So an argument doesn't exist in the ether somewhere there, right? So the argument has to be made by a person, and the person in this instance is a vegan. And the claim I'm making is I don't think there isn't any vegan that I've come across that would say these behaviors are a moral obligation, right? So I don't think there is a vegan out there who says, look, you should engage in no leisure activities, you should sit in your house and only leave the house when you must do, or you should live on a minimum calories diet, you shouldn't engage in any you should sweep the floor in front of you when you walk, you shouldn't use your car unnecessarily. I've not come across vegans who say that, so I don't think it is entailed. I don't think they put it into the moral argument for veganism.
Well, you're right. I think most vegans are just completely, if you ask me, a lot of vegans are actually dumb, if you ask me. So I don't know. Most vegans just use fallacies, and that's pretty much it. So I don't know. I don't really care what most vegans do or what most vegans will say, because a lot of them believe that we're herbivores and stuff. So it just doesn't really, you know what I mean? It really just, the hypothetical scenario and applying philosophy to it, it works best really in finding out if it's like hypocritical. I already know that people are hypocritical.
Yeah, of course. Okay. And sort of another reductio that I'll bring in now is the the actual diet. So this is kind of tied into the minimum calories one, which is do you think then it is an ethical obligation to consume the diet which results in the least amount of harm and suffering for an animal. For animals, yeah.
Do I think there's an obligation towards that?
Yeah, to consume the diet that results in the least amount of animal suffering and death.
I would prefer that people do that, but I'm not sure what it would mean for something to be obligatory. Because, well, I know what it means, of course, but I'm not sure what that would look like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what I mean is, so a lot of this will be hypothetical because obviously there are practical limitations. But what I mean by obligatory is, so yeah, I'm just saying a moral argument entails some moral obligations or behaviours that a person should or should not do, right? So I'm asking, based on the
Well,
moral argument.
I don't believe in objective morality, so I guess I can't say that it's an absolute like obligation or anything. But I would say that I would prefer that, right? I would prefer people be vegan and stuff.
Yeah, but for the purpose of this argument, LogicBoi, you have to accept moral objective moral realism, right, or objective moral truths. Just for the purpose of this argument.
Why would I have to do that? Well, you're saying if I wanted it to be obligatory, I would, but I don't think it is obligatory. I think it's my preference that I want to spread to other people.
Yeah, but the whole proposition is based on the fact that there is a moral argument for veganism. So that's we're both accepting there is some moral obligation there. There is a moral. There are moral real. We're it's kind of like error theory, isn't it? We're just accepting moral realism for the purpose of this debate.
No, that's not true at all. You don't have to accept moral realism to have a moral debate about anything. Like it's pretty much just like political at that point.
Yeah, no, but we're not having a moral debate, are we? We're having a sort of the debate is actually in reasoning or logic, isn't it? I'm saying there's a hypocrisy or a philosophical inconsistency in the argument, in the moral argument. So obviously you have to accept the moral argument. You have to accept the presupposition that there is a moral argument, right? Otherwise, that's a debate we're having.
I accept that it's a moral argument, but why do I have to accept realism to think that the moral argument is a moral argument?
Well, no, not to accept that there is a moral argument, but to accept my proposition that there is hypocrisy in the moral argument for veganism. Right? So we have to presume there is a moral argument.
Well, I already said that I think that the ethical veganism doesn't entail hypocrisy, but vegans themselves might live hypocritically. But I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why. So you're saying that if it was objective, then it would be hypocritical. But since it's not an objective moral standard, it doesn't matter. So it's not hypocritical.
No, sorry, I think I got a bit sidetracked there. We kind of digressed, but I was saying, I was just saying we're both, just for the purposes of this debate and discussion, I thought we were just both, adopting a moral realist position, or at least accepting the moral argument for veganism, right? So the claim that veganism is a morally superior position to non-veganism. I thought we were both starting from that position.
It's my understanding that like anti-realism is the belief that moral judgments don't have any weight or any cognitive meaning. Is that what anti-realism is?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. But
okay. So then, why do I have to assume the opposite of that in order to think that somebody's hypocritical, following from a line of logic?
Because the person who we're claiming is hypocritical, right, is starting from the presupposition that veganism is morally superior to non-veganism. So we're sort of we're jumping into their worldview now, aren't we? So we're sort of taking their presuppositions and following through their line of reasoning and concluding that it's illogical, or there's an entailment or a reductio, an entailment which they wouldn't support, or a reductio ad absurdum, right? So we've got to jump into their worldview now, right, and say, okay, veganism is the morally superior position, therefore there are moral obligations with veganism. Do you follow?
I follow that, but I don't understand why an anti-realist, because all anti-realism is just not thinking that there's an objective morality, or that a moral statement has true cognitive like value. So I'm just not sure why somebody couldn't be a hypocrite if they can have a moral, they can believe in they can have a preference towards a moral system, right? And they can adopt that moral system. And they can still be hypocritical, even though they think that there's no cognitive weight to these moral statements, because they could be contradicting these moral statements it can still be contradicted, even though it's not cognitively valuable. Don't you think?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. So, yeah, but that is kind of like taking on a sort of error theory position, isn't it? Have you come across that, like error theory? So they are pretending to be. They're sort of pretending that moral or quasi realism, even actually, you could say they're pretending that moral realism is true. And that's okay as well. I don't mind that. Right. But we've got to accept that the position that they are concluding that there are moral obligations. Otherwise, they've got no moral argument, have they? A moral argument has to result in some kind of moral obligation or some conclusion that says this is good, this is bad. Otherwise, it's not a moral argument, is it?
But somebody doesn't have to assume realism or even pretend that they're in realism.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll concede. I'll accept that. Right, you can accept quasi-realism or something like that. Right. Because it's a strange person, isn't it, who says, "Oh, right, this is bad." Oh, do you believe in good and bad? No, I don't. That would be a strange person, isn't it, who made that argument? Right. So you kind of
believe that they have a preference towards one concept or the other, but they can also think that that doesn't have any real substance to it. It's just some sort of arbitrary preference.
Exactly, but that's not a moral argument, is it? If you go to somebody and say, "Oh, I like chicken," right? That's not a moral argument you're making, right? Your argument would have to be chicken is bad for you or chicken is good for you. That's the moral argument, right? Otherwise, you're just expressing.
I disagree, but I think this is an argument to be had between a realist and an anti-realist. But I think we pretty much covered the debate topic. Like you said that it's hypocritical to be vegan because of these hypocritical things vegans do, which I agree that vegans do, even myself in many cases. But I just think that I think if the debate proposition was that many vegans are hypocritical, I think you would take the win here. But I don't think that it's entailed that ethical veganism is hypocritical. And I do think that veganism and vegans have a long way to go if we do want to not be hypocritical and if we do want to be as moral as we think of ourselves to be.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, and thank you for clarifying that. But my position is that yes, it doesn't necessarily entail hypocrisy, because like you said, you could adopt those reductios or you could endorse those behaviors and actions that are entailed by the vegan moral argument. But my point is that I don't think anybody, even any vegan in their right mind, would endorse would personally adopt or publicly endorse such behaviors. So that's where I'm saying the argument is actually hypocritical, because it cannot be made. You cannot make that argument without it resulting in what the vegan themselves, the average vegan, would consider a reductio.
Okay, right. Well, like I said, I personally think the average vegan can be considered dumb. So I don't, you know what I mean? So, but it doesn't really matter to me what the average vegan thinks.
Okay, let me rephrase then. Sorry, you're right. Not the average vegan. Let's say the well philosophically trained vegan, like the PhD in moral philosophy vegan, the one who makes the moral argument. That vegan is the one I'm targeting. I'm not targeting the average vegan.
Okay,
that's fine. I'm targeting the one that actually tries to make a sophisticated moral argument for veganism. Right? And we know there are a few of those circling around on YouTube and other places. So those are the ones I'm sort of targeting here. Even the Peter Singers and the like. Right?
Yeah, because I think it's inevitable right now. I think it's pretty much inevitable that people are going to be hypocritical if they're trying to make ethical or moral judgments right now. Just because, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
but the world's not perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So they're going to be hypocritical on a personal level. But what I'm saying is that even their own conclusions are hypocritical. So, for example, I don't think, and I can't obviously speak for him, but I don't think a Peter Singer is going to endorse any of the reductios or any of the entailments that I've made here. I don't think he's going to say, yes, one should live like a hermit in their house and not engage in any leisure activities. I don't think he's going to say that. I think he's going to say that's not a moral obligation. And that's the point. So when he says that's not a moral obligation, I'm going to say that's hypocrisy in the moral argument. That demonstrates hypocrisy in the vegan moral argument.
Yeah, that might be the case. Actually, one of the next books on my reading list is Peter Singer's Practical Ethics, because I haven't read anything by him, and I've been kind of interested in what he has to say about things for utilitarianism. I don't agree with some of the things he said in interviews so far, but it's totally. I do agree with you that many people could be hypocritical, especially even if they don't accept the reductio, like you just said. If they live the hypocrisy, but then say that they're a hypocrite, then that's doesn't really make their philosophy hypocritical. But if they're going to actually say that it's not a reductio, and that or that it that it is a reductio, but they don't have to accept it, then that would be hypocritical on the philosophy itself, I suppose. But
Yeah,
that's the beauty of philosophy. Like,
sorry, go ahead.
but yeah, I just don't think. But yeah, I think we're probably like veganism is still pretty new, and there's a lot of people having these exact kind of discussions about veganism hypocrisy right now, and I'm sure these sort of hypocrisies will be hashed out in the future, and people will probably, I think people will probably start striving towards doing less and less unnecessary things that are sort of wasteful and whatnot.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think there are lots of excesses that we engage in, right? And I do think maybe overeating is a bad thing. Maybe unnecessarily, or going on multiple holidays a year is unnecessary, right? But I wouldn't go as far as to say that any sort of leisure activity is unnecessary or is unwarranted or immoral. And that's where I've sort of drawing the line and saying there is this subjectivity involved in determining what is reasonable, and that kind of breaks down the whole moral argument, because then the non-vegan can suddenly say, well, it's reasonable for me to eat a chicken sandwich once in a while. And so that's why I think veganism is very very difficult to promote.
Well, when it comes to the leisure thing, I don't want to go, I think I already mentioned this already, but I don't think being leisure, something being like a leisure activity automatically would cut it out of the picture in this case, because the leisure activity would have to cause some sort of unnecessary harm or something. But and I'm sure we can think of all kinds of leisures that don't do that, even though they might seem a bit restrictive and they might not have any physical objects involved or something like that. But yeah, I think. But either way, I think we covered the topic pretty well. Yeah, I guess it's up to the audience to decide who has the better argument, I guess. I think we both agree pretty much, though.
Yeah, and I think you did a very good job. I think you did make some very good points, and I think I think where our disagreement probably lies is that distinction, isn't it? Where you say that vegans can be personally hypocritical, but it doesn't make the actual argument itself hypocritical, right? Whereas I would say, I think the argument is hypocritical because no vegan who makes the argument would say those entailments are moral obligations.
Okay, so you think the argument has to be clear? You think the argument has to be clear enough as to iron these things out?
Sorry, say that again.
So you think the argument needs to be clear enough to like sort of iron these problems out, and it also needs to be more obvious to people so that they know like what's a reductio, not a reductio. Like it just seems like you're saying that people they're not really taking the meaning of veganism literally enough or something like that. But I understand what you're saying. Like we partake in lots of useless activities, like shopping bags. Really, the amount of plastic that go into shopping bags is literally a crime. Like I don't understand that, but yeah, just stuff like that. But yeah, I have somebody else that's wanted to talk to me right now, so I think I'm gonna go and do that. But it's been nice talking to you, Jiva.
Yeah, you too, and thanks for the debate.